Before I get started on this video, I got good news. The Last Republic is finally available for Marines. That's right, it's available on Audible. The ratings for the book have been pretty good so far, and you can even get a signed copy at Bunker Branding. All right, let me help this guy out with his thesis paper. How does open source intelligence and war blogging affect public perception of military conflict? One of my Substack subscribers, this guy named David, he's doing a research paper / PhD thesis on this topic. He reached out to me with a few questions. I'm going to answer them on video. That way we all can benefit. Question number one, how would you situate your research within the broader scheme of work on contemporary warfare? I think the difference between me and a lot of other people is that I am trying to be entertaining as well as informative. There's people like at the Institute for the Study of War, think tanks, RAND, what was it, CSMI or whatever. These guys, they're writing papers for other smart people to read. I'm taking a look at those papers and actually occasionally doing some of my own research as well so that you can sound smarter at parties. And I think what this does is it just kind of makes something that is extremely difficult for most people to understand accessible to the average person, because the average person has never looked at the Geneva Conventions. The average person doesn't know why Russian tank turrets pop off of their hulls. And while the news might tell you, hey, look at all these Russian tank turrets whose turrets have popped off their hulls, I can explain why. And that's really not something that that anybody else can really do in this current space. The one thing someone had once called me the Neil deGrasse Tyson of open source intelligence. And whenever there's whenever there's a new satellite that's launched, they wheel out Neil deGrasse Tyson and he goes, well, this satellite can see beyond the stars. And then you feel smarter, right? That's pretty much me. Next question, what distinguishes your approach from traditional academic or journalistic methods? I think my approach is a little bit different because I use more of an intelligence gathering approach. I was never an Army 35 Fox, all source intelligence analyst, but I wrote the software that they use. And so that got me pretty good at figuring out what needs to be done in order to collect intelligence well. That doesn't necessarily mean I can come up with actionable data on it and courses of actions. And if you notice, I never do that. That's kind of not my thing. I'm also not into weaponeering or targeting. Traditionally, I just tell my client where the bad guy is, and the bad guy goes and does something. But I guess kind of my difference is that I take a more intelligence mindset. A journalist might be looking for a story, what is the narrative or why is this important right now? Whereas I'm and a historian might be looking at it from the standpoint of what lessons are there to learn. And I'm looking at it from a standpoint of what is the probability that this thing is true, or what is the probability of the next thing someone will blank, 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 blank. So I think that's kind of the difference, is that I take a more intelligence-based approach. Next question, do you see yourself contributing to the academic study of war, public discourse, or understanding of the topic on the ground? A little bit of the last two items. For genuine academic study, there's people who are smarter than me who have the time to actually write a book or write a paper. I do write papers. I'm actually finishing up a paper on drones for the European Union right now. It is absolute hell because it's all new research and I barely get paid anything for it, at least compared to what an equivalent YouTube video would be. So I don't tend to write that many papers, although occasionally I do, just to kind of keep up my cred in academic circles. Really, I'm there as that bit of public discourse so that people can watch my stuff and say to someone at a party, like, no, actually, you're wrong, and here's why. It's because we've been able to intercept missiles since 1991 during the Gulf War. And I think that plays a critical role because so few people join the military these days that the average person's understanding of the military is really just video games and movies, right? And when it comes to understanding the situation on the ground, there are a lot of soldiers who will never crack a field manual. They will never actually open a manual, but they will watch a YouTube video or a YouTube short or an Instagram reel, right? And one of the reasons I've started doing this China series is that I want the next generation of soldiers and sailors to look at the China series and go, okay, this is the adversary that I'm likely going to be fighting in the next couple of years. And I think that's really, really important for the average soldier, sailor, and Marine. Next question, what effect do you think your work has on the public's understanding of conflict? I certainly think that I've helped the public understand why things are the way they are. You know, one of the big issues that I saw not only during the war in Ukraine, but also the conflict in Gaza, was that people just kept pointing their fingers going, that's a war crime, that's a war crime, that's a war crime. And nah, sorry, dude, that's just war. That's just the way war is. And since we're getting this war streamed into our heads in 4K, high def, in near real time, we don't have the time to process this stuff. And so because it looks horrible, we tend to believe that this thing we're seeing is a war crime. And nah, man, that's just horrible. You know, like that's just kind of the way war is. And since most people have never served in the military, they just don't understand it. In a way, I'm kind of reminded of the pictures from Abu Ghraib. You can Google them. I can't show them here on YouTube. But there was an American reserve unit was put in charge of a prison in Iraq. I believe it was in 2004 after the Iraq invasion. And these guys, they were committing war crimes. They were genuine, honest-to-God war crimes, like piling guys in naked body piles and making a guy stand on a box for hours on end, taking pictures of nude men. And to Iraqis, it's very shameful to have a woman look at you naked. It was a war crime, definitely 100% a war crime. But what's interesting is that when the world saw those pictures, the world went, oh my God, that's so horrible. When America saw those pictures, America went, oh my God, that's so horrible. When Iraqis saw those pictures, they went, eh. and that's because, like, when you got arrested under Saddam Hussein's watch, they just killed you or threw you in prison under horrible conditions. So, you know, what is kind of funny is that sometimes what is considered a war crime by the book definition might not even be considered a big deal by the local population, because the Iraqis were like, oh, Saddam did much worse. So, next question. Have you seen any tangible shifts in public perception from your reporting or analysis? What I have seen is some of my catchphrases kind of pop into view. One good example is I often say, cause problems, not dilemmas for your adversary. So that's one thing that I occasionally see pop up in public. I also see the survivability onion pop up. I did not invent the survivability onion, but I think I certainly popularized it. So I think those are probably the two biggest things that I've kind of seen generate. There's also the three-part test, which to discover whether something is a war crime. And that three-part test is basically, hey, is the person you're looking at or to combat, or meaning are they out of action due to illness or injury? Is the person you're looking at a clearly marked medical personnel? Or a third thing is the person you're looking at trying to surrender. So I think that's kind of entered the public eye. But really, there'd probably be problems, not dilemmas, I guess, because you can use that for a lot of stuff. Next question, how do you navigate shaping public opinion while navigating complex conflict dynamics? The answer is I don't. I never, ever think about the consequences of my actions when talking about a certain subject. And there's a reason for that. The reason is that I don't care about your opinion. You know, there's a half of my audience who think that I am some left-wing liberal libtard, and another half of my audience thinks I'm a conservative Newsmax shill. And as long as I'm pissing both of those two groups off, I'm doing something right. You know? And so if I notice, hey, This thing is going to call out Israel on committing a war crime by rolling over this sign. Yeah, I'm going to do that. I'm going to do that, and I really don't care what Israel thinks, because if they don't want me to do a video on that, then don't freaking do that thing. And that's the same thing with Secretary Hegseth. You know, I had high hopes for Secretary Hegseth. The guy made some mistakes. I called him out on those mistakes. He did the wrong thing when he used Signal to talk about military activity during Operation Rough Rider. On the other hand, President Trump's Golden Dome idea, which actually probably wasn't his idea, it's actually not a bad idea. It is something that we can do. It will cost money, and it is a question of scale. But it is certainly something we can do. So, honestly, when it comes to what I think about shaping public opinion, I don't. I just tell it like it is, and you can make your own decision. Next question, how far does your work reach in terms of audience views and influence? So I think I average about 6.2 million views a month, roughly. It used to be up at 10 million views, but then YouTube had like an algorithm change back in December, and things kind of fell again. So I know that there's people in the intelligence community that repost a lot of my stuff, and usually they're sending it to each other, not because I'm discovering some sort of new thing, but going like, oh, this guy gets it, right? Like, I know I have fans in the intelligence community. I've spoken at a lot of events in the intelligence community, and I think they just like having me there because it's almost like being at an astrophysics convention and Neil deGrasse Tyson comes, right? You don't invite Neil deGrasse Tyson to your astrophysics convention because he's a brilliant astrophysicist. I mean, I'm sure he is a reasonably good astrophysicist. I'm sure he's written reasonable papers, but he's not one of the world's brightest minds in astrophysics. You invite him because he knows how to communicate astrophysics down to the average person, and he's the closest thing you're going to get to an astrophysics celebrity, right? So I'm the closest that people are going to get to an intelligence community celebrity. So I think that a lot of times my videos, I know for a fact my videos have been used in Congress to send to a congressman's staff and kind of tell people like, hey, this is actually what's going on, or hey, this is why this is happening. I know for a fact that's been done before. But I have a pretty wide reach, and I think that for the most part, the reach is just the average person who can now understand the difference between a tank and an armored personnel carrier, and didn't know they wanted to know that information until they watched the video. Next question, are there particular groups of government officials or NGOs or journalists you hope to reach more effectively? I mean, I would love to reach the New York Times and let them know they need to hire more veterans. I would love for the New York Times to understand what they're doing is wrong. But they have some really crappy coverage of military affairs because they just have no context in which they can actually base their assumptions, right, or their articles. Newsmax, for as much as people talk badly about Newsmax, about a fourth of the people that work for Newsmax are veterans. I have yet to see them get the military side of the story wrong. Might get other things wrong, but I've yet to see them get the military side of the story wrong, and that's certainly a point in their favor. Next question, what metrics do you use to measure the impact of your work? I would say the real impact is views, right? How many people went to watch my content? The other impact is my Substack subscribers. There are people going onto my Substack and paying me the $5 a month for a membership on Substack. So those are kind of the two metrics I use. I don't use any metrics like, how many people talk about me and stuff like that. In the big scheme of things, I am not that important. You know, I'm rarely going to get quoted on the news. And I don't know if I would have that much of an effect on policy if I was. But for the most part, for me, it's really just viewership. Are people watching the videos? Are they engaging with the videos? And are people volunteering to become Substack members and pay $5 a month for ad-free video. Next question, how central is OSINT to your methodology and what advantage does it have over traditional tools? I've often said that people lie, right? Like, human intelligence is great, but one huge disadvantage of human intelligence is that people lie. Things like signals intelligence and cyber intelligence, which I'm a big fan of, I know the most about. I have a lot of confidence in cyber intelligence, mainly because you don't tend to lie when you're doing a browser search, right? Like, if I really wanted to know you, like if I really wanted to know what you were thinking, your favorite food, the favorite kind of TV shows you like to watch, I could ask you and you could lie to me. Or I could look at your browser history and I find out that you've been watching The Bachelor, right? So, it's cyber intelligence doesn't lie. Like, it's absolutely crazy what people say to each other online, even if they suspect they're being watched, So, I would certainly say that with open source intelligence, where you're using things like publicly available data, or even semi-publicly available data like marketing data that you've purchased, can be very, very useful for putting dots together. For example, let's say you want to know how many people are in the Russian army. All right? How many people are in the Russian army? All right, well, you could ask the Russian army. They might tell you the truth. They might not, right? Another thing you could do is you could look at Wikipedia, right? Maybe Wikipedia has the right answer, maybe they don't. Another thing you could do is look at population trends, right? But a fourth thing you could do is look on the Russian Ministry of Defense's website for contracting and see how many contracts are out for new pairs of boots. So if you know that every conscript gets 2 pairs of boots and there's a contract available for 100,000 pairs of boots, that'll tell you exactly how many conscripts are entering the Russian army that year, or how many are estimated to enter the Russian army. So that's kind of one example. So think of open source intelligence as like putting a puzzle together. And, even if the information isn't classified, you can come up with a lot of interesting information. In my novel, The Wind Machine, one of the ways the Chinese found out about the wind machine was they looked at publicly available records for selling electricity on the grid. And the guy who owned the hedge fund in the novel had a coal plant that powered the wind machine. And on certain days when they really weren't running strategies for trading stocks, they were selling that electricity on the open market. So China didn't know they had a supercomputer, but they knew a supercomputer had to be there because there's less electricity for sale when the supercomputer was running under a particularly heavy load. So that's kind of the power of open source intelligence. The government might have satellites and synthetic aperture radar and heat sensors, but something just like open source intelligence, looking at the records of sales of electricity, can lead you to all sorts of things. Next question, in what ways do you think that OSINT has changed the landscape of conflict study and reporting? It certainly made it easier to get open access information or open information. It used to be you have to go to the library. Probably the biggest game changer is maps. That's almost definitely the biggest game changer. In the sense that the kind of satellite maps that you get today, Napoleon would have killed for these things, right? Like, we would have killed for them in the first Gulf War, right? Just to have really good, up-to-date maps is a complete game changer for anyone in the intelligence community. And now the power of those maps is available for about $250. Like, if you want an up-to-date, honest-to-God map of, let's say, the Kharkova Dam, which I used to inspect the Kharkova Dam to see if it had been an explosive or undermining, you can do that. You can do that for $250 per photo. And even just 10, 20 years ago, that capability didn't even exist. Okay, next question. Do you think the use of OSINT by independent researchers is shifting the way wars are covered and understood? No. Mainly because traditional media has a stranglehold on the psyche of people who are consuming news. And in a way that there's good reason for that. If something is published in the New York Times, they usually make sure that it's fact-checked and so on, right? Because they're kind of held accountable to their subscribers. To the average person, the average sophist, or the average attention-seeking person who is just throwing crap out on Twitter, they're not beholden to the same standards, right? So they can put out a lot of messy noise, a lot of messy information that isn't necessarily true. Now, occasionally, like the New York Times or other organizations will try to do their own OSINT stuff. I think they have, the New York Times, they're like the visual investigations team. They just do a crappy job. Again, mainly because none of these guys are ex-military, right? So they don't even know what they're looking at half the time. One case in point is the way they covered the Al Arabiya hospital explosion, which was about 10 days after October 3rd, or October 7th in Israel. So, that kind of shows you just because you are a big organization, it doesn't mean you have people who know what they're talking about when it comes to investigations. But for the most part, I would say that it really hasn't changed the discourse, mainly because traditional news organizations still kind of have a stranglehold on the psyche of general reporting. Okay, next question. How do you see your work and OSINT in general influence the way wars are reported and conducted? I think that most people these days, they tend to consume their news on a small device, right? They tend to consume their news in 3-minute chunks in an Instagram reel or on TikTok or on YouTube Shorts. And I think kind of the way that I do things, nobody here seems to realize this is a crosswalk. I think the way I do things tends to be very conducive to what I call binge learning. And that's where, once you kind of get me in your algorithm, now you have this perpetual feed of information. Now, you might get the occasional cat video or something like that, but now you're learning something while being entertained, and you're learning something that is accurate. You can still go read a long article in the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal for people who are really into that. But for the most part, most people seem to get their news, at least most younger people seem to get their news from social media. And if I can be that seed of truth that's in social media, that kind of helps counteract the people who are the sophists, the attention seekers, or the bots, the people who are being paid to spread disinformation, then I'm kind of calling that one a win. Next question: what challenges do you have in gaining credibility in more traditionally academic or journalistic circles? I can tell you that 2 years ago, when I went to AUSA, which was a conference that the Army holds, really the Army, this Army booster organization, I could say, holds every single year in Washington, D.C. I went to AUSA, and they would not give me journalist credentials because they said, well, you're not a journalist. Your viewership is very impressive, but you're not a journalist. That was the attitude 2 years ago. Today, it seems like more and more people are recognizing that social media is a valid method of disseminating information. I think the other issue is credentialing, because some organizations, the Marine Corps is one example, they want to know what news organization you work for, right? And unless I'm on assignment from Newsmax, I can't say I work for Newsmax. Right? I work for McBeth Productions, LLC. I work for myself. So, credentialing is an issue. Let's say I want to go over to Israel. I have to say what news organization I'm with, and oftentimes they don't really consider being a YouTuber to be valid. Academic-wise, I think academics are not comfortable with the idea of social media, mainly because it's more popular than them, right? Like, you might have someone like case in point, Carolyn Bueno, who is incredible at what she does. She writes some fantastic articles, but she doesn't really have a social media presence. Whereas I'm not as good as Carolyn Bueno, but people like watching me because I'm entertaining and giving out good information. So who's going to win, right? So I could see how academia could be a little annoyed that people like me even exist. All right, next question. Do you think the difference between academic research, journalism, and activism is becoming more blurred, especially when it comes to open source intelligence and conflict analysis? Absolutely. Absolutely. I think that one of the things that the war in Ukraine has showed us, and you can see this with someone like Tim Pool, one of the things that has showed us is that if you can kind of build a niche on the left or the right, and then kind of stand yourself up as some sort of conflict analyst, even if you're only giving your opinions, you can find that audience. And in a way, that's pretty scary, because some people might mistake your conviction for authority, right? And I mentioned Tim Pool specifically because the guy took a boatload of money from Russia. You have any idea how much money I could make if I went full left or full right? Like if I just said, screw it, I'm just going to be completely partisan, like Legal Eagle or Tim Pool. I would make so much money, I wouldn't have to shop at Food Lion anymore. I'd be able to shop at Wegmans. I would be on a boat someplace making P. Diddy look like he was Amish. So, I certainly think that the lines can be blurred, especially among reporting and activism, especially when it is activism disguised as reporting, and both the left and the right are guilty of that. So, yes, I absolutely believe that is a concern. Oh, I forgot. There was one more component to that, and was where do you see yourself on that spectrum? I don't really see myself as a researcher or as an activist or even as a journalist. At first, when I quit my job back in 2023 to do this full time, I thought, I'm going to be a journalist. But then I watched some of the stuff that Tim Mack did from the counteroffensive, and I realized I could never be like that. I also don't really know how to write in that journalistic style, but what I'm really good at is compiling data. So I guess maybe that's kind of like research, but I'd rather just say I am an intelligence professional who does really good YouTube videos to help people understand their world. So that's kind of where I fit in. I fit in on the side of truth as opposed to the side of whatever activist organization is sponsoring me. Next question. Do you think OSINT has opened up the information space, and what influence would it have on policymakers? It's just another tool in the toolkit. It used to be you might have to pay a source for some kind of information, and now a lot of times that information is publicly available, right? If you want to know how large a factory is, you can just buy the imagery of that factory and use a map tool to get the length and height, right? As opposed to, send a spy out there to somehow measurement or pay someone to steal the plans. So it's just a different tool in the toolkit that needs to be used with the panoply of other tools in the intelligence toolkit. Finally, what advantages does OSINT offers policymakers in understanding fast-moving conflicts? Well, I think that what's kind of interesting is that OSINT moves at the speed of the internet. And you can poison the well sometimes. You could put out false information. And Pakistan did a fantastic job putting out false information after India launched airstrikes against them a couple of weeks ago. After the terrorist attacks in Kashmir. India essentially poisoned the well, and the narrative about what happened stopped being Pakistan got hit 9 times, 4 times in its own country and 5 times inside Kashmir, and it started becoming, well, how many Indian planes were shot down, right? They were able to seed that doubt, which was brilliant because it changed the topic. And when it comes to something like open source intelligence, since you're dealing with things like raw video or raw audio or raw images, that tends to give you a more up-to-date picture of what's going on as opposed to intelligence reports coming in from the field. Now, again, those pictures could be damaged in some way, especially if you have a situation where the adversary is intentionally putting out misinformation or false pictures like Pakistan did. But I think it just gives people a better example of what's going on in real time, at least until AI gets so good that AI can put out propaganda in real time contextually. Okay, buddy, I hope this helps out with your dissertation. Let me know when you defend your thesis. Thank you so much for being a fan, and I hope everyone else here learned something. Wow, this girl from Watertown sure is cool. Hey kid, what's going on? Think tank! You know, a girl from Watertown is kind of like riding a moped. It's lots of fun till your friends see you on one. What's really cool is a t-shirt or hoodie from Bunker Branding. Wow! Intel Life! Control-C, Control-V! That's exactly what we do! And Bunker Branding has all sorts of cool gear. Intel Life, Aerosol, Live, Laugh, Launch for Destroyer, Trident, HIMARS, and Patriot. Think outside the bomb. Drone Suite Drone, Department of the Boat People, landmines, and even the tow missile. It would behoove you to grab one today. Girls from Watertown aren't cool, so wear your Bunker Branding gear. Now I know. And knowing's half the battle. Hey babe, you wanna dance? Bunker Branding!